I am Christine Dance. I am the daughter of Judy Bonnick Mawhinney. She is the daughter of Nita Mae Bonnick, and she is the daughter of Azalee Dance. I found this very powerful to say. I hope you did too. As someone who identifies as a woman in particular, it is powerful to name my matrilineal heritage. I heard some of you naming all kinds of ways of naming that lineage. It's powerful to remember where I come from. And in saying their names, I remember their stories. Especially, I remember the struggles that they went through. Because really, some of our best stories, don't they come from our struggles? Growing up, my grandmother, which is the Nita in this story, or Edith Juanita, as she was named, she told me stories about her childhood. I heard very glowing stories. I heard that she got to attend a prestigious boarding school for girls in Louisiana. I learned that that was where she learned how to play violin and drink tea and learn how to be a proper woman, and she mingled with girls who had privilege and access. There are a lot of oohs and ahs over art and music and culture. This was very important to her, something that was so important to her that, of course, my mother rebelled against it. And then I did even more so. It wasn't until I was much older and she had died that I heard the rest of the story. She didn't get sent to this boarding school. She and her sister Naftel and her mother Azalee worked there. More specifically, they were the cleaning staff. She was surrounded by these people, but she worked for them. I sometimes think about what that must have been like for her. Was she teased? Was it just all aspirational? Did she get to participate? Were people kind to her? I imagine what she was wearing and whether it fit in or not. I've thought about how she acted and how important that might have been for her because she was straddling very different worlds. But that's not even the most interesting part about her story. The school fell on hard times, as did much during the Great Depression, and it closed. Azalee and her daughters had no place to go. That was when I learned about Mr. May. Azalee had to swallow her pride and wrote to the man that she was still married to, who was now living in Washington State, and said that she and the girls needed to come home. He agreed, as long as she and the girls acted as housekeepers for him and his mistress. And no, I can't imagine that. I cannot imagine that at all. I can't imagine the train ride that they had to pay for themselves up to Washington State. I can't imagine the anger, the shame, the desperation of having to live that life. I think of them all when I am going through hard times. I think of my grandmother on the other side, who had twin sons while her husband was serving in the Navy. One of those twin sons was my father. She was on the third floor of the apartment, and the rolling washing machine was in the basement. And the simple act of carrying her babies and her laundry down into the basement of the apartment where she was so she could do the wash, so that they could have clean diapers by herself, Much different than a story on the other side, but still, I think of that often. I think of her when I am going through hard times. All of this reminds me that I come from resilient people. It reminds me that our times are not the first that were hard. It reminds me that I am not alone in my struggles, that I come from a cloud of witnesses who have had their own pasts. I am finding that I need to draw on my stores of this resilience when the world seems chaotic and full of hurt. When there is war and climate change and division and unease, I am drawing on this resilience. And it is particular in this season as well. This upcoming holiday season is joyful for many, but it is also busy and brings its own share of stress and chaos. And for some who are estranged or missing someone or who are lonely, it can be a very painful time of year. For any number of reasons, right now, resilience is something that many of us are searching for in these times. So here's the thing. I can draw on that resilience from my grandma Nita without necessarily always liking her. I wasn't close with her. In fact, she was pretty mean. She was classist, as I said before. She was mean to my mother, and she gave me Dove soap every Christmas for about a decade because she didn't think I kept myself clean enough. It's okay, I've done the therapy, I'm okay. She was openly racist to members of my family. And she never knew I was a lesbian. I don't even know where that might have gone. So I wasn't necessarily close with her, but knowing her story, I can understand where some of those things come from, even if I cannot condone it. I know she probably did the best that she could out of an extreme childhood. My mother took the lessons that she could out of that and moved her life forward. Okay, well, maybe she overcorrected a little bit. And then hopefully I picked up from her and made my own healings, although I'm sure that my children can offer you a long list of the places that they are healing from my journey. I know that what all of them lived through, a piece of it, and I can acknowledge that we are all flawed and doing the best that we can. I carry all of their experiences with me. If you will, this service is a continuation of our service where we remembered our ancestors, but we're doing it through the lens of seeing where they got their resilience and learning how we can use it in our challenging times. This is very relevant to us as Unitarian Universalists. Ours is a living faith where we draw from the courage, the experience, and the traditions of those who came before us, but we also adapt to current times, challenges, and social situations. We are who we are because of the Unitarians and the Universalists who came before us. Their free thinking, their use of reason, they're full of love and accepting faiths. But we can also acknowledge that, like our families, they were not perfect. While we have some heroic figures who worked for the abolition of slavery and the civil rights era, we also have some really awful histories in our faith of how we upheld slavery and segregation, even in our more recent history. We have failed both in our actions and our lack of actions to support our indigenous siblings as the combinations of manifest destiny and colonialization and industrialization forced out people who belonged on this land. We were big in the suffrage movement, but some of the key Unitarian leaders advocated for not including Black women in that movement so they could move it forward. Having this honest understanding, not from shame, but in naming that people were doing the best peopling that they thought they could do with their own histories, their own flaws, their own humanness, is important. It's critical as we do the work of dismantling racism and all of the other oppressions in our world. It is important to have an honest exploration of the people who preceded us. I think many of us divide ourselves into two categories of ancestors, those who lived through slavery or those who perpetuated it, or those who lived through another oppression and those who perpetuated it. But our histories are usually so much more complicated than that. It's so much more nuanced. And grappling with both the resiliency and the mistakes gives us a more nuanced way to ground ourselves in the work of dismantling the systems that formed us. Many on the right don't want to look at these stories because they don't want their children to feel shame about their histories. I am not advocating for us to have shame either. That is not a helpful tool. What I want is us to encourage each other to look with appreciation and honesty and from a lens of resilience, and decide the stories we want to be told about ourselves going forward. What kind of people do we want to be? So in these challenging times and in this hectic time of the year, I encourage you to remember where you come from. What are the stories that shaped you? What are the stories and the messages that you got that still give you lights for how to live? And what are some of the ones that you maybe went a different direction? Where can you draw from what your ancestors went through, who they were, how they shaped you, to draw strength and commitment? May you know that you and those who formed you got through a lot of difficult times, and you will still in the future, as well as all of those who follow you. And may you know that you and those who formed you experienced so much joy as well, and so will you and those who follow you. We are connected through these people, through our experience of being human. May their resilience shape ours, and may we carry that joy forward, knowing it was not given freely, or it was not given without constraints, and yet we share it freely with the world.